Okay.
Good.
I'm going to tell them about the insurance really quick.
Very good.
So, remember we talked about the HTH insurance at the very beginning of the semester? So what we've decided is that we'll just cover that. So somewhere closer to the time that we go, I'll go ahead and I'll just enter all your names and we'll do it. But the thing that you have to know is if you are not flying June 10th to 20th, I need to know. Because this is only going to cover you June 10th to 20th. Okay. So if you're going to go and stay longer, you want extra the insurance, we can add it on because we're at 11 days, it's considered 11 days. It's not going to make any difference, I can add it on. But it'll cover you and then you'll get an email, whatever email you're using for BYU, that's the email that it'll come to. And then I would recommend you print that card out and maybe even a copy of there's a form in case you do have an accident or something. Print that out and keep it in your bag with you. So you have one because we won't have a place to print it out really, but then carry it with you.
And that we'll be seeing.
But in case you have to, then you've got the little card. Okay? So we won't do it yet, but we'll do it closer to the time. It covers a lot of things. It says here, the BYU plan is like $33 for 2 weeks, which is really cheap. And it says it covers 100% for up to $250,000 of medical care with $250,000 of medical, security, natural disaster, and political unrest evacuation coverage. No deductible. Anyway, it'll also cover some prescribed medication if you need to get medication while you're up. So anyway, it's a good thing to have, and we are always happy to sign up for that. It's not very expensive, and if you need it, save a lot of money. Just let me know. Send me an email if your flight is not from the 10th to the 20th, if you've gone a little earlier or staying a little bit longer. So if it's longer than 2 weeks, that will be there. Is that going to cost? I don't think it will. I'll just have to look at it and see. But I'm guessing that from 11 to probably 15 days or something like that. If it does up it, it's not going to be very much because 2 weeks, that's pretty cheap. But I can look it up. I can do a quote on it and find out how much it is.
Okay, ready?
Okay, our speakers today are the Mortensons. I think they're going to be mainly Larry, but maybe some additional speakers.
Yeah, might need a little help.
So,
Chris might be giving me a little prompt here.
Yes.
They've been over there previously. They went 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And so they've been to the castles we're going to be seeing. So this is first-hand guided tour. Larry.
All right. Well, I'm glad to have all of you come today and everything. It's good to have you here. And we're going to give you a little we're going to give you a little preview of what you'll be seeing when you go over there and everything. And they will have a guided tour. Unfortunately, the last time we went, I think our guide didn't speak English very well, and so he was mainly catering to the Italian tourists. And so our people were just kind of on their own, and they were just kind of wandering around. I think Chris said that she might have one that speaks English better lined up for us. So that would be a good point. But I think they'll give you information when you're at the castle about going through and seeing the different rooms. Anyway, I am Larry Mortensen. I am Chris Mortensen's husband. And the first thing I'd like to ask you to do is kind of shut your eyes for a minute. I say the word castle. What comes to your mind? Think for just a minute. Everybody has images of castle. Okay, I'm going to ask, okay, what are some of the images? How about you? What do you see?
Well, I see the intro of Disneyland.
The what?
The intro of Disney, each movie.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. When I talk about the entrance to the castle, is there just like a front door, or is usually it's the big drawbridge that comes down the thing? Interestingly enough, a lot of castles never even had those, and a lot of them didn't even have moats. You think about the moat, you know, you have the hero, and he has to swim the moat to rescue the fair damsel in distress, you know, from the evil villain. Oh yeah, yeah. I read a little bit about that, and they have a lot of myths that say there were alligators in the moats, but actually they kept fish in the moat, and oftentimes they would get fish out of the moat. They'd send the servants out, and they would actually get fish out of the moat and actually for dinner, so take them to the kitchen.
They had a stream running through the moat so that they had fresh water.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if they. I guess some of them did. A lot of.
One is a garter robe.
A what?
A garter robe. A toilet.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact,
I used to live in England.
there's one instance when the French were laying siege to a castle, and they actually sent guys up through the toilet shaft to actually capture the castle. Probably not many volunteers for that, but they actually sent people up through the shafts. And there were actually people who their job was to clean those out. They were the septic tank people. And they came around and they actually took care of that service for you. But we have things like drawbridges and we have moats, and a lot of them, originally the moats weren't even filled with water. They were just a big ditch that went all the way around the castle. And sometimes they put pointed stakes in them, and they would sometimes put oil in them and light them on fire if somebody was trying to get across and everything. And over time, a lot of the castles, the moats actually filled in with water naturally. So this is what you see when you have a lot of these big moats with the swans swimming around and everything. Actually, the groundwater actually came in and actually filled those over time.
I think they have a moat around the Queen of England's castle there in London, don't they? A partial moat. Have you seen that? Windsor Castle.
A Windsor Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not Buckingham Palace.
Windsor Castle started about 1100 AD, and so it actually was originally a big castle and everything, but it's become the home of the royal family now, pretty much. That's what we identify it with. But from the definition of the dictionary, it would be a castle. It's from the Latin castellum, is a type of fortified structure built in Europe and the Middle East during the Middle Ages by the nobility. And most scholars are debating that the scope of the word castle, but they debate the scope of it, what it includes and everything, but usually it's considered to be the private fortified residence of a lord or noble, as opposed to a fortified city or a town. Let's see. Whoop, gotta do this. Okay. I included some pictures of a Roman fort because are we going to go to Aosta for like a day? When you're in Aosta, you will see the remains of the Roman wall that went around the city, and there's also the remains of an amphitheater and a number of other buildings. An interesting thing is when we were there before, they had an archaeological site going on, and you know how they put plywood around the construction site and everything, and you have walkways. At intervals, they had plexiglass windows. You could actually look in and see the archaeology students working. They were digging things up and everything. But this is pretty much the standard floor plan of almost every Roman settlement and everything. It started out with a military post with an east and a west, and a north and a south gate that had individual names. And inside there would be various buildings like the commander's quarters, barracks, granaries, other things like this. And so at Aosta, for example, this is what you'll see. You'll see the remains of the wall going around. And let me just ask you a question here. I was reading the walls are largely composed of travertine. Is there any travertine in that region that they might have been able to quarry the stone from? Because remember when you're building these structures. Yeah, a lot of them were rubble. They had two walls and then they had a lot of rubble in between, kind of filler in between the walls. But I did read that, and I'm assuming that they had to find the travertine somewhere fairly close, at the foot of the Alps up there.
It is a hot spring deposit because they just can't think.
Mm-hmm.
Travertine like they have in Midway.
Carve easily. That's
yeah. What is travertine exactly anyway? Is it like a granite?
Freshwater limestone.
Okay, limestone. That figures because some of the other castles we'll see were made of limestone also.
But it's confusing. They use the word puffs two different ways. It could be like travertine or volcanic.
Mm-hmm.
You read about it.
But there are a lot of remnants of the Roman fortifications at Aosta that you can see there and everything in addition to buildings. And usually they started out as a fort, kind of a castle-like arrangement, and then the city grew around it. You'll have amphitheaters and marketplaces and everything, but initially they were usually a fortified military post like that, and then they grew out of that. And then what I've included is just some of the tools they found. They found these tools in a site in Germany, which are some of the kinds of tools that... Have any of you done construction? Would any of these look a little bit familiar? You got your shovels and your picks. Pretty much a lot of the same standard stuff that we have today, that people would use those kind of tools. And then, of course, here's some that are a little bit later, and these are some of the tools of the trade that they would use in making the castles later on, like the ones we're going to see. And they would use a variety of things. They first had to call in engineers and people to survey it and everything, and make sure everything was level and everything before they started. Okay, I have popular images of castles. Usually one of the images, if you close your eyes, you see a battle going on. That castle up in the right-hand corner up there is a castle that exists in Palestine. It's actually still there today. How many of you ever saw a movie called Kingdom of Heaven? It had Orlando Bloom in it and everything, and it's about a young knight and everything. They feature that castle in that movie and everything. It was built by a crusader, and it was there for several hundred years. The one at the bottom shows a typical image, if you have a siege of a castle, some of the ways they try to get into the castle. The popular image, of the catapults and all the things when they try to batter down the walls and everything. So those are some of the popular images. Here we have, what I wanted to tell you is, do you think all the castles were made out of stone in the beginning? In the beginning, you had a lot of knights and lords and nobles didn't have the resources to build with stone, and they didn't have the people. So many of the castles for about 100 years were made out of timber, kind of a Fort Apache look, with the timber walls and everything. And when William the Conqueror took England, he conquered England. Eventually, his followers built over 600 of these Motte and Bailey castles all over England. They were cheaper to build. It took usually a group of men about that they would use the local people as laborers. Usually took a group of about 100, 200 men, about 40 days to put one of these up. And this is the kind of fortifications they had for a long, long time. They just didn't have the means. The Normans, for example, in England didn't have the ability to work in stone that much. They usually had to import masons later on to build in the stone. So you don't start seeing a lot of the big stone castles popping up until the middle of the 1100s. But these are the most popular kind. And then we have, these are, let me see if I got it right. There we go. I want to get back. This actually shows some of the construction for an actual stone castle, like the ones you're going to see. It shows some of the different laborers and what they're involved in doing. To give them power, sometimes they had a big treadmill like a squirrel cage. And they'd have workers, peasants, actually walking in the squirrel cage to actually power the winches and things like that. You'd be sitting there all day. It doesn't be kind of a fun job to be just getting your exercise all day long like that. This picture
to generate the most power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll notice that in the lower right-hand corner there, if you look at the wall carefully, you'll see it's filler in it. They didn't make them all the time out of solid stone. They had two walls, and then they had a bunch of rubble or filler in the middle, and that saved on costs and things like that. I love this little part right here because it says the architect is sitting there and he's worrying about the building costs. What's this going to cost me? And interestingly enough, we don't have a lot of records on how much these castles cost. Some of the ones that were built by royalty we do, though. Many of these castles, we don't really know how much they cost, but obviously they were an expensive endeavor. It took a lot of money and a lot of time, and you had to do a lot of careful planning. Here's some of the structures. Now you will see, where's my pointer on this thing? I can just show you with my hand. Those wooden supports that come out, you will see what's been left or what's been reconstructed at finish of some of those posts coming out. And what they were meant is they were additional bracing that came out of the walls to help put scaffolding on. And what they do a lot of times, these castles, is they built wooden structures around the outside of the wall for added protection. They also have holes in them. And if you walk up underneath the walls and everything, you can see they would drop stuff on anybody attacking. And contrary to what a lot of people say, they use boiling oil a lot. Oil was expensive. So usually they use boiling water, and sometimes they would make sand red hot. Red hot sand. Can you imagine getting sand dumped on you when you're wearing armor and it gets down the side? Yeah, red hot sand could be dumped. But these holes of this type here, they were often holes that were kind of like a trap door and everything. And later on, they actually put them in the stone walls. But these were actually built to help as added defenses to help deter attackers. So we'll see some of those posts coming out at finish. Actually, we'll see they put those in the beams that come out of the wall. Okay, this is a layout of a castle, fairly typical layout. Didn't come out really very clear. The red is the basement level, which would be like the dungeon and the prison. The green here and everything would be maybe the ground floor. This is where the Lord would have his bedroom and his chambers and everything. And then there would be the great hall, would be a little bit higher up. And then you have workshops, you have the chapel. Almost all of the castles, as they were of any size, would have a priest, a resident priest that would administer the spiritual needs of the family and the people in the castle. So he would have a small chapel, and a surprising number of them actually had stained glass windows. And then you'd have things like workshops, and then of course the kitchen, which was off there, which was a very important thing. Notice that they kind of came up with the idea like we have. Most houses today, you have the kitchen off of the dining room. That's kind of how it was there. So that they had little doorways and everything that the servants could bring things in right into the great hall and actually serve it up. And they could prepare it and then bring it right in there. They didn't have to go very far. But a lot of the castles had winding staircases. And that's the only bad thing. Imagine being a servant and you're hauling buckets of water up these staircases, up to the upper level. But a lot of it was laid out with the idea in mind of convenience, for the lord of the manor. Actually, sometimes his quarters would be up on the third floor, above. But a lot of that was laid out so that you could receive guests in the courtyard, and then they could mill around and everything. And then when dinner time came, you'd go to the great hall, and that's where you would have your dinner. But anybody have any questions about this so far?
So Larry,
Yes.
how many castles exist in Elsta Valley that they may see as we're driving out?
How many are there?
Yes.
I don't really
There's a
know.
map.
I have a map, but it doesn't show all of them and everything, but there's a lot. But I will give you a little information on castles in general here. Okay. What?
20 or 30 castles.
Oh, yeah, at least that many. And you can see them from the bus. When you're going down the freeway, you look off, you'll see a little knoll, a hill, and it looks like a big rectangular estate. Some of them look a little like a castle. Some have a few little things on the walls. A lot of them have been renovated, so they look more like a country estate. The road to ruin. So about the 1500s, the age of knights and castles was coming to an end. And there was still a lot of interest in tournaments and chivalry. One of the kings of England, I can't remember which one it was in a joust, and he actually died because he got a jousting lance right through the slit of his helmet, and it killed him. But this was like in about 1500s or so. So they still got on the horses, and they still tried to play knight, and the chivalry thing. But the actual aspects of chivalry and everything were fading, were dying. Can anybody tell me what one of the innovations that brought the end of that about? What was one of the things that would have brought about the end of the castles as fortified centers? What invention?
The ladder.
Oh, yes. What? Yes, gunpowder. That's the one thing that made a big change. And you see in Italy and other places, you see later on that they start building cannon forts, which are completely different in their construction. They're not like the old castle type structures. They're actually meant because cannons had greater range. They would build these low, big forts and everything, and they would dominate an area with cannon forts.
They didn't have common trebuchets, the things that would wind
Oh, yeah.
and throw the rock over.
Oh, yeah.
When did they exist?
They started using those about 1100. And there's a guy in England that actually throws small cars and pianos with one. He's actually big enough they can actually throw large objects with it. Probably about 300 or 400 yards. You can actually throw a grand piano about 400 yards. But they had a big variety of those weapons, and they also used to use a method called mining. They would actually employ miners, and they would actually tunnel to the wall of a castle. They would fill the space with timber, logs, boards, everything else. And then when they got it up against, down to the foundation of the castle, they'd light it on fire and then run and get out of there. Because when that timber burned, the heat would create, the fire would actually cause a section of that wall to collapse. So that was a method. But they had to be careful because sometimes the defenders could hear them digging. They'd start mining from the other direction. And you actually had pitched battles taking place in the tunnel underneath the walls of the castle. But there were various methods, but eventually gunpowder and cannons replaced the old trebuchets and the catapults and everything. And it's interesting because kings wanted to show off their grand palaces in capital cities more than they did their castles. So eventually you get the big fortified towns and cities with walls and towers. They steal a lot of the thunder from the castle people. So the castles increasingly are isolated. They become royal, noblemen's estates, but they don't have a lot of power because The kings are beginning to assume more power and they want more control. And so these guys are not as powerful as they used to be. The castles are just kind of these big landmarks out there. They wanted to keep their powerful nobles close to them in the royal courts, rather than away in distant castles where they could plot rebellion. So this is one of the reasons that they did this. And you can see some of the variety. And of course, even today we have knights. And knighthood is no longer necessarily just a special prerogative of the few, the noblemen. In England, of course, outstanding citizens can gain knighthood, authors, and humanitarians, things like that. Anyway, getting to what we're really going to be doing. This is the Aosta Valley, and Aosta you can see is way up in the corner there, at the foot of the Alps. And it's actually in an area that borders, there's a border of Switzerland and Austria also, France. And when I was doing research on these castles, a lot of the names associated with the French. And I believe if you go to Aosta in the area even today, there are a lot of residents there that actually speak French as well as Italian. So we're going to be going all the way. We're going to be flying into Milan. So Milan, we're going to come into Milan and then we're going to go, I guess we're going to follow this freeway all the way up here. And we're going to hit the St. Vincent. I think that's where we're going to stay, isn't it? And then, are you going to spend one day going into Aosta?
Well,
they're going to hike.
They're going to hike. Okay. So as older folks might be going into Aosta for the day, because we were there before. We were in Aosta. But all along this route up here, you'll see these castles. You look out the bus window, you'll see them dotting in the hillside. They look like big country estates.
Not a time to sleep.
Most of them are big rectangular structures. They're just like a big old...
By the way, I think the whole area of Alston was claimed by the French, and so they took it over, and it was part of France until after World War II, Eisenhower made him give it back. They were very proud about that.
A little side note to this, and we're in Milan, I don't think we'll get a chance to do this, but Leonardo da Vinci resided in Milan, and one of his patrons was one of the big wealthy men in Milan and everything, and this patron said, you know, I want to honor my dad, my father. He says, I want to commission you to build this giant horse, a big equestrian statue, nobody riding it, just a big stallion, a big horse. So Leonardo set to work, and he built this giant clay statue and everything, and he had all of his plans out and everything. And it was at this time that the French were threatening Milan. They were threatening to come in. And he also had a tough time trying to get bronze for the statue because they were using it to make cannons. So the statue just sat there, and eventually the French entered the city of Milan. They actually captured it, and Leonardo, with many other people, fled. He left the city. So unfortunately, the French came to the city, and they saw this big statue, and they thought, So they used it for crossbow practice, shooting it apart. And so a few years ago, there was an airline pilot, worked for United Airlines, and he had some of these sketches of Leonardo's, the original sketch of the horse. He managed to get together about $1 million, and he actually had this horse cast in bronze, in the same dimensions that it was before. And an airline in Italy, one of the airlines actually flew the pieces of the statue to Milan free of charge. And they assembled the statue the way they think it looked and everything, and it's in one of the main squares in Milan today. You can see it. It's really imposing. It's just a beautiful big horse. But yeah, all along this route here, we're going to see a bunch of these castles here. And let's see. Oh, here we go. These are a few of them. So going from our starting point, you see Venice right here, and then the Sonia is not very far. And Chris tells me that Uso Castle is just basically across the road from this other one here. It's on the hill. It's very close.
I remember seeing it. I'm going to watch for it this time and see if I can.
But you have Saint Pierre, you have Sarre, you have Serra de la Tour, Ameville, all of these castles you can see in that area. And it's interesting because a lot of them seem to be laid out along the same ground plan and everything. They look very similar. And over the centuries, they've been turned into big country estates. So they kind of had a castle look, but then they've morphed. They've changed a little bit. There's one. We've been in this one. Chris and I have been in this one. You have to take a tram to get to the top of it. And at the top level up there, they've actually converted into a state museum for the Aosta region. It's got all these exhibits on agriculture and industry and everything in the area, and everything, kind of like something like that you see at the state fair. But it is pretty cool. But I think at one point in the early 1800s, Napoleon laid siege to this. He starved the garrison out and actually made them surrender. But it's very imposing. It's just got these big bastions all over and everything. It actually was the seat of power for the Italian royal family at one time. So that's one that we see. And then there's Varus Castle. And these guys figure prominently in later on because they actually were people who were at odds with the Bishop of Alsta. They had a really bad feud going on between these people and the bishop. And we'll learn a little bit about that in a minute. And then we have Sarre Castle. See how they gradually over the centuries they kind of morphed. They kind of changed a little bit from looking like a real castle like we think of, and they look more like just big grand estates. They do add a lot of rooms and everything, but a lot of these it took maybe as much as 100 or 200 years to add on to. But they began to look more like big villas, big lavish estates. Whoop, what am I doing here? Okay. Amityville, I don't know how to pronounce that exactly, but you can see the French influence in a lot of these. With Amityville Castle. And so you have some of the castle featured, but also it just looks like really more like a palace. More like a royal palace. But they're really.
Because I think you missed a couple of them.
Okay. That one there, and then yeah. That's another one. This one looks a little bit more like what you would think. It looks more like Saint Pierre. But notice that they have a lot of the castle features there that you have. Sarai. There's where we're going. Fennes Castle. And I even brought a little scale model here someplace. It's right there if you guys want to take a look at it. A little tiny little cast model of what it looks like in 3D. But that's where we're going to be going. Are we going there first? Fennes, I don't know for sure.
And these guys may not be going there. That's why you have more information on this.
Okay. First documented was in documentation is 14 or 1242. And it was not built for military purposes, but to serve as a prestigious residence for the Chalant family. The Chalant family, I did a little research, were very prominent in the Aosta Valley. They had a lot of economic control, and they actually were in charge of some of the other castles. They actually controlled a lot of other sites besides just this one. At the time, it was just simply a big keep surrounded by walls. About 1242, it would have been more like a castle look that you see. It's just a big keep with walls around it. And later, at a later date, they built the double wall around it for added protection. Between 1320 and about 1420 was the biggest building period. This is when most of the towers were added. This is when the second wall was put in around it. So you're getting beyond just the wall and the keep. And the castle got its pentagon layout with towers and staircases during this time, balconies, all kinds of. It became more and more lavish. And there's another picture of it. Let's see, I need to click this. There we go. I got some of the features of these buildings here. You guys notice the towers on that? You notice the arches around the bottom? Those are actually to give a little bit more support for the parts that jut out a little bit. And so you have these features here, and then you also have right there that you can point out here. And then the walls, we have what are called crenellations. And the crenellations, what do you think those would be used for? Who has an idea? Why do you think they put them there? That broken tooth pattern. Huh? Yep. It offers a little bit of security for the guys that are shooting from the walls at you. In other words, they sneak out, take a shot, and they can duck back in and reload, and that protects them. And some of these, let's see. Some of these, those are the crenellations right there. These have an interesting kind of a horn pattern on the top of it. You'll notice that on a lot of the castles in that area. They have that little top. It's not just flat across the top, but they put more ornamentation on it. But the idea is, let's see. Okay, what they had a lot of times, either in these parts right here, or in the walls themselves, you had arrow loops. You actually had slits where people could shoot crossbows. Later on, they actually fired muskets through those, but they're in different patterns, different shapes, arrow loops, so that you could actually shoot through that, and you wouldn't even have to expose yourself at all. You just shoot right through the wall. And so a lot of them, you'll see some of those. In this castle at Fennes, you don't see them as prominently. They're just like little window slits and everything, but they do have them there. And some data later on in time, they converted them into just windows in the building.
When did the crossbow invent?
The what?
Crossbow.
Probably about.
Over 1300.
They actually had them back about in the late Roman period, even earlier, back in the Roman period. But they really didn't come into heavy use until about the year 1000. About
When we go
1000.
to Venice, we're going to see the entire armory that they had for the city. So you can see crossbows and all sorts of things. I didn't know what they were.
Will we have a chance to see that? Yes. Cool. In Venice Castle, apparently the last person to own it, one of the last noblemen, actually sold off his collection, mostly of weaponry and everything. They do have an armory room, but I don't know if it has what it used to have in there, because I think they moved some of it out. Now, in the courtyard here, you have a circular staircase, and this is interesting because a lot of them just had a big rectangular staircase. This one actually had a circular case. You guys, what do you see up above it? What's up there? What do we call those? The paintings.
No.
Begins with F. Frescoes. Now, I'm not exactly sure what they did, but I think fresco is when you paint in wet plaster. You actually paint and then you use kind of damp plaster as your canvas, and you actually paint the pictures with the canvas. And a lot of these castles were renovated in the 1930s during the time of Mussolini when he was in charge of Italy. They had to come in and they had to restore them, and so a lot of them had renovation work done in the mid 1930s. But these, it has a wooden balcony. They say in the early days of Venice, the balcony actually extended all the way around everything, and there was no second story in the beginning. That's what they added on later. But you go up those steps, and the lord of the manor probably would come out on the top of the landing, and he would greet visitors and guests. So it's a semicircular stone staircase, and it had wooden balconies, so that people could come out on the balcony and actually converse with other people in the courtyard, and they could actually see what's going on, smell the flowers. And fresco of St. George killing the dragon, and he is, by the way, rescuing a damsel in distress in that painting. With walls of the balconies decorated with sages, prophets, and proverbs in Old French. So again, we have the French connection. The Chalant family had that French connection. It was an Old French. But yeah, I've seen these, and they're really, really well done. They show some of the, in some cases, they're meant to represent the old prophets and really wise men, like in the scriptures. The frescoes are attributed to a painter named Giacomo Geol, and they're not sure if he painted them actually or some of his students did, but they followed his style. May have been some of the guys working for him. Here we go. Here's some more examples of it. Usually, what do you think is one of the most common themes of these frescoes? You think religious or secular or? Pardon? Yes. A lot of them like to show the saints, the ancient prophet, the old prophets, the saints, the apostles. And it's interesting because if you have some that shows like the Virgin Mary, usually they have portraits of the family members that are at her feet. So it's a great attempt to try to make it look as if the family was pious, you know. They wanted to show everybody that we're religious people and everything. Even if we're fighting with our neighbor in the next county, we're still pious people, and we hope that we'll be able to go to heaven. So to show our sentiments and everything, we're going to have all these paintings done. But a lot of times they're religious and everything, and that's the usual thing.
How they're still so beautiful. You would think after all these years that they would start fading away and be ruined.
Well, they did some restoration work in the 1930s. They repainted some of the artists and actually touched them up and everything. Over on the other corner there, you can see some of the saints. These are portraits of different saints with Latin inscriptions. And then we're gonna. This is the next castle. This is the Sonia, I guess is how you pronounce it. And I tried to find out about. It has one interesting feature. That pomegranate tree out in the courtyard is iron. It's actually cast out of iron. And as far as I could tell, it was made around 1500. So it's a pomegranate.
This is the first thing.
Yeah, this is the other one we're going to see. Last time we were there, we just saw Finnis Castle, but we're going to see two of them here. You notice how it looks a little bit more like a grand estate and maybe more like a castle? But the ironic thing is, the earliest mention of this castle was in 1151, when you know what a papal bull is? It's a message sent out by the Pope. It's kind of like a communication from Rome. It's mentioned in a papal bull in 1151. It was owned by the bishops of Aosta, up to 1379 and renovated around 1400 by Alberto Chalant. Again, that name popping up, Chalant. Again, so they must have had a lot of influence in that valley, the Chalant family. About 1340, you have a feud that's brewing between the Bishop of Aosta, because that was his seat of power. And it reached a boiling point with a family, another family over across the valley. And in about 1340, they actually laid siege to this castle. This castle was attacked by somebody, and part of it was set fire to. So by 1379, the Bishop of Aosta relinquished control, and he said, okay, I've had enough, that's it. And he relinquished control over to the Veres family, the ones that he had this feud with. And so they were the centers of power in the valley there. He finally said, enough, okay, you guys can have it. So it really kind of came under their control. It's famous for its garden and the wrought iron pomegranate fountain, the symbol of the family, and a lot of magnificently painted rooms. Again, there's more frescoes in there, and they actually show members of the family in different generations. And at one place in the castle here, they actually have a coat of arms that shows the family genealogy. You can see how the family, and they did this so that they could impress on their descendants how far back they went in the genealogy.
I told Larry he couldn't show pictures of it because I want you to see it.
I think they have all of the popes painted in one room.
Mm-hmm.
All to wall, every pope.
Yep. Yeah, they wanted to acknowledge the popes. We're really powerful guys here and everything, but we want to acknowledge Rome anyways and make sure we know it. And it was bought by an artist in Vittorio Avondo in 1872 and was renovated, and he gave it to the state. I think just after World War II, it actually gave it to Aosta, the city of Aosta. It was given over to the city of Aosta as a landmark. And watch for Baron's Hall, adorned with frescoes, the King of France's room, which I believe in the late 1400s, the King of France actually stayed there for a couple of days. Then they have the Knights of St. Maurice's room, which one of those rooms actually is the whole ceiling is adorned with the lilies of France. That's on the French flag. It's the symbol of France. And then when we go around the city of Aosta, you'll see some of the arches. This is actually one of the, this is a gate, one of the four main gates that was originally in the city, the four cardinal directions. And I believe that these walls are some of the ones we talked about in the travertine. Now, the walls of Finis are actually limestone. I guess limestone must be pretty common to find around there. Then you have an arch, which is a triumphal arch for Augustus Caesar. That was put up about 21 BC to honor Augustus. And later on, that little roof was put on by a different architect, probably about in the 1700s. Or I think it was about 1850 he put that roof on. So around the city, you have various churches, the Cathedral of Assunta. Did we see that one?
Yeah, that is a beautiful cathedral. If you guys do get a chance to go, it's so pretty inside. All these carvings, it's just beautiful.
One of the interesting features as you walk in, you think most of the people who lived back in there, how literate do you think most of the people were back then? Not very much. Most of them were just peasant folk, and they came in and they would listen to Mass and everything. So since they couldn't read and write Latin and everything, what they did is they had these big carved, nice wooden panels as you walk into the church, and it gives the entire story of the Bible from the time of Adam and Eve all the way up to the crucifixion and resurrection of the Savior. So that these people could read the Bible on the wall. They could actually look at the sculptures and the carvings, and it would tell the story of the scriptures of the Bible for them, because they couldn't read and write and everything. So this is how a little bit of how they were educated, how they learned. And then that tower later on was turned over to the mayor of Aosta. Later on, they made it his house and his headquarters. He was the mayor of the town there. But it dates back to about 1100 and something. Let's see, where are we going? Is that the end of it? And I just had a little bit of information for you guys, a little bit about cost. What are some of the things you would consider that would be important to consider for a castle? When you're about to build one and set one up, what do you want to think about? What will you consider?
Location.
Pardon? Location. You want it there so it's not a symbol of power, but sometimes these castles and these buildings were built as administrative centers. And you'll find it in Estonia, and I think in Finis, there were certain areas in the castle that later were turned into Hall of Justice. They were actually turned into a courtroom because the lord of the manor actually was the local magistrate. He was actually the justice of the peace. He would actually preside over cases that were brought before him, and he would make rulings on these things. And it's interesting because in the early days in Utah, Brigham Young wanted the same thing. He didn't want federal judges. He wanted the bishops to have court and everything because he felt it was more fair to the local people. And so in the early days, here you have usually the lord of the manor would be the guy who would minister to local needs of the people. He would pass judgments and so forth. And so you look at location, strategic position, or one intended to dominate the landscape or a mark of power. The building material had to be selected, and then you had to move it. So obviously the timber castles that they built in the early days were a lot cheaper to build than the stone castles. And like I said earlier, we don't have a lot of records of how much these things cost because they just didn't seem to include that. But there were cases of some of them running up to 20,000 pounds, 30,000 pounds, 80,000 pounds, which would be a huge sum today. But they were willing to do it. But usually the larger amounts were spent by the kings because they had the coffers, they had the resources to build these things.
You know how long it took to build?
Usually an average of about 10 years. But Finnis Castle was built over about 100 years. So they would probably add a little bit, and then they would stop for a while, and then when they got more money, they would add a little bit more. This castle is remarkably homogeneous. Some castles were quite hodgepodge. They start out with a keep, and then they move this thing, and you could see the styles changing as they added on. This one actually looks pretty much uniform. But yeah, it took a lot of time, sometimes at least 10 years being about the minimum, but it did take a long time. So I have a little something here in closing here. In case you should wonder where so much money could go in a week, we would have you know that we have needed and shall continue to need 400 masons, both cutters and layers, together with 2,000 less skilled workmen, 100 carts, 60 wagons, 30 boats bringing stone and sea coal, 200 quarrymen, 30 smiths and carpenters for putting in the joists and floorboards and other necessary jobs. All this takes no account of the garrison, nor purchases of materials of which there will have to be a great quantity. The men's pay has been and still is very much in arrears, and we have the greatest difficulty in keeping them because they have simply nothing to live on. So a lot of times, you got a construction job back in those days. It might take a little while to get your paycheck in the mail. But not only stone castles were expensive to build, but their maintenance was a big drain. And they contained a lot of timber, which was often unseasoned, and as a result, they needed careful upkeep. For example, it is documented in the late 12th century that repairs at castles such as Exeter and Gloucester cost between 20 pounds and 50 pounds annually to keep. So when the Lord was away, or they weren't having a war or anything, they usually had a guy who would be the keeper, the steward of the castle. He would be kind of like a butler today, and he would be in charge of the upkeep of the castle. And this has kind of continued on. He would be a little bit like, isn't there a butler in Downton Abbey? And he has to kind of run everything, and he'd be like the steward. He'd be a little bit like that. So anyway, in closing, I just hope that you guys, you might want to do a little research on your own and a little study a little bit about these castles and what happened there and everything. But I just wanted to give you a little overlay of that. And I'm pretty sure when we go to the castles, I'll probably have a little handout or a program thing that you can follow. Because it gets pretty detailed at the Sonia Castle. You go to this room and this room and this room. One of them, I believe, has about 50 rooms, but they only allow you to go into about 10 or 12 of them. So there's lots more rooms. And in case anybody wondering, they do have ghost stories. Mm-hmm. All of these castles we looked up, they actually do have stories of ghosts. One of the women who lived there was unfaithful to her husband. She played around while her husband was away on trips and everything. So she was condemned, found guilty, and she was executed. So she may be one of the spirits wandering the castle.
It said that she wandered the castle and would kiss handsome men.
Oh, okay. So are there any questions at the end of this? Anything you wanted to ask about that? Feel free.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
I'm worried that the students that are doing the geology that day will want to go with you guys to the second castle instead of doing geology.
Oh, and I'll tell you one thing I left out is there is graffiti in that castle. In the Sonia Castle, they have graffiti all over that dates back maybe over about 300 years. And they have people who are pining away about their loved ones, about their lost love, or they're having moaning about their money problems and whatnot. A lot of it's written in, some of it's in Latin, a lot of it's in Italian, other languages. But yeah, a lot of the walls are covered in graffiti and everything. And I was going to ask the guide, a lot of the masons that built these castles, they would leave their mark. They actually would sign their work. And so you have what are called masons' marks. A lot of these masons would leave different places in the castle. They'd have little carvings. It'd be like a brand for a ranch. And when they brand the cattle, it would be their mark, and it would show that they were the builder. So maybe we'll have to look for that one and see if they have found any of those in the castles or the original builders. So
Very good. This was incredibly informative.
So anyway.
Sorry, no one will want to do geology.
We have to try and squeeze everything.
Yep.
Well, maybe what we can do is do the geology and then also come down and also do a tour of Alistair or something like that that same day. It's light during June. Maybe we can work till 10 o'clock. We can have a John McBride Nutella gelato. Where we had Nutella.
Tell that story, John. I think you should tell it.
Oh, well, it's embarrassing.
Well, it will save them from doing the same thing.
Yeah, so we went to this little gelato place and gelateria, and
I was going for you. It's so fun.
yeah, I thought it was Nutella flavored ice cream, and so I was just kind of pointing, and the lady like kind of looked at me funny and like, no, that's what I want. So
she was like, are you sure?
And then at some point, I realized, well, no, she didn't speak English, I didn't speak Italian.
You can see the look in her face.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at reading body language, I guess. But it dawned on me at some point that she was just scooping out pure Nutella. And at that point, I was in over my head, and I didn't want to, like, oh, no, that's not. So I just kind of played along, like, oh, yeah, I use that all the time, you know. So I think she's kind of impressed.
Yeah, she's
going to be looking for him.
But I was trying to eat it over the next couple hours in the car, and I'd eat a little bit and put it under the seat, forget about it.
He wouldn't waste it either.
Maybe it's, yeah, I can't throw it away. Maybe it's still under the seat in another car. I don't know.
Anyway, if anybody could eat a full scoop of Nutella ice cream, €10.
That's right. They have a beautiful, what is
if you'll
the
eat
square?
it, I'll buy it.
Market Square or whatever is in the very center lounge with little shops around it.
I think it's really worthwhile just to see the Roman wall, see those plexiglass plates. I mean, the city is built up probably 10 feet like from the original Roman walls.
We go to Fabrizio's mother, one of the guys' mothers, has a little jewelry shop there. And very reasonable. It's really fun to go in and pick out something you like.
Anyway, we love it. I hope you love it as much as we do.
You will. Very awesome. All right.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah, I was still trying to figure out. I didn't have grandkids the last time I went, and I do now. So I was trying to figure out something. Maybe I could smuggle Kinder eggs in my luggage, but I don't know if I.
Don't do it. You left at the border.